This is what doctors did for their diabetic patients to keep them alive, and they had a lot of success. I've recently been reading Gary Taub's book, Rethinking Diabetes. It's phenomenal. One of the things that I love about it is it has confirmed to me a lot of things that I suspected for many years about what the history of carbohydrate restriction must have been and of diabetes treatment, just by inference, thinking, how did they get here? And I always knew, for example, one of the things is that they must have given in to patients, because saying basically, well, if we tell them what to do to control their blood glucose, if we tell them what's right, they're not going to do it anyway. So rather than just tell them what's right, we won't even tell them. We'll just assume that they're not going to do what's right, and we'll tell them, go ahead and eat what you want and take your insulin.
David, how did you find Carnivore?
Yeah. That's always a circuitous kind of a question for me. The phrase that comes to mind is, "What a long, strange trip it's been." Uh, it goes back as far, I would say, low carb for me goes back as far as the late 1980s when I was a patient of Dr. Atkins, the Dr. Atkins of the Atkins diet. I live not too far from New York. So as a result, I was having a problem with something cardiac. We don't know what. To this day, I don't know what it was. But something was fluttering, and this was happening at work. And at that time, I was working in New York City, and so they took me right away. Actually, after a couple of days, this kept happening, and I'm like, I don't know what's going on, but maybe we should be concerned. So they took me to the hospital. They hooked me up to all the monitors and the machines, and they said, everything looks okay to us. We can't figure out what's going on. So a friend of mine suggested that I see Dr. Atkins because sometimes he can address underlying causes, which medicine generally tends not to do. So I went to him, and he, like he does with all of his patients, he ran some tests and then he put me on his low carb diet. And whatever the problem was, whatever the issue was, it cleared up. I also, in the process, lost like 20 pounds. And because I was very strict with myself about it, the way they couch it, it was very interesting. They say, we want to run a test to see how your body reacts to removing all of the ready carbohydrate in your diet. Of course, they knew what the outcome would be, but this is how they get people to comply. And it would work for me because I thought, oh, it's a test. I got to be really careful about this because otherwise we're not going to find out what the truth is. So I was careful, and over the course of about, I don't know, 6, 8 weeks, I lost 20 pounds. And they were really happy, obviously, with the results. And as a result, I got to go in and sit and have a session with the big man himself, because of course it was a big center with lots of doctors, and I didn't work with him initially. But anyway, from that time on, I was impressed, and I kept my diet to a dull roar, right? I wasn't really as strict with myself after that. And there were times I went from, let's say, I started at 200 pounds, and I went down to like 180, and then I'd bounce up to 190, and then back down to 175, because I would come in and out of being strict with myself. And over time, that's kind of where it stayed until 2012. In 2012, I started having burning feet from diabetic neuropathy. And so I recognized right away that this was probably a carbohydrate problem. And I noticed that, like, if on the train in the way to work in the morning, I had a bagel, oh man, did my feet hurt. Because bagels, they'll really spike your sugar, your blood glucose. So so I put two and two together, and I knew already how to go on low carb. So I got really strict with myself. And in the next 3 months, I lost 20 pounds in 3 months. And the burning never has gone completely away, but it doesn't escalate like it used to. It doesn't take a big spike and really burn and hurt the way it used to. So I've kept it under control that way. And in the ensuing another 6, 9 months after that, I lost an additional 15 pounds. So I was down to 165, which I think for me is probably, given my structure, my bone size, my skeletal size, is probably about right. And in fact, last year about this time, I had a couple of back-to-back illnesses that brought me down to 155 pounds. So I lost an additional 10 pounds. I thought, well, since I've gone to all this trouble to be sick and lose all these pounds, I might as well try to see if I can keep them off. And I really have. In fact, this morning I got on the scale, I was 151. But interestingly, for the first time in my life, I went to my urologist. I used to get kidney stones, so I have a urologist that does ultrasound every so often to look for new stone formation. That's another story that we can talk about. But I I went to him and he said, "Have you lost some weight?" I said, "Yeah, matter of fact, I have." And I explained how I was sick and kept it off. And he said to me, you probably don't need to be that light. You could afford to put a little more weight back on." Like, okay, that's the first time in my life I've ever heard that. So that was kind of refreshing. And I've mentioned that to a couple of other people who said, "Oh yeah, my doctor's never told me that." So that kind of brings us up to today. I'm at a weight that I want. So one of my goals is not weight loss. Mostly what I'm looking for is to, number 1, get my blood sugars as stable as possible, because there are cases where people have been able to do that, usually with the help of insulin, which I'm not on, to have their feet, um, their foot pain particularly, but neuropathy generally, heal itself if you can keep your blood sugars stable enough. And so I'm very interested in doing that. That's one of my goals for carnivore. Now, you asked specifically, how did I find carnivore? About a year ago, a friend of mine living in England, who comes for a visit maybe twice a year if he can, um, told us that this time when I come, I'm not going to be able to eat anything but meat. I'm on a strict carnivore diet. I'm like, carnivore diet? Okay, so that's new. Never heard of that. Of course, I'm well acquainted with what's called keto, because that's basically Atkins on steroids. And it works really well, and I'm impressed with that. But carnivore, I don't know, that's kinda concerning. I mean, what are you gonna do? And the usual thoughts go through my mind. What about vitamin C? What are you gonna do about, all these wonderful phytonutrients we always hear about? You're gonna miss out on astaxanthin and zeaxanthin and blah, de blah, de blah. All this stuff is going through my head because 'cause I've been into, nutrition since I was in my late teens. I just love it. I find it really interesting. I read a lot. And so anyway, all this is going through my head, not thinking that some of that might be inaccurate. So anyway, he came for his visit, and true to his word, he was like, "Yeah, I can have bacon." He allows cheese, so he has cheese and steaks, and the usual very reasonable carnivore stuff. And he's had very good results. Now, in his case, it was for digestive issues. He was having trouble digesting. He thought initially at least leafy greens, maybe other things too. And he's had really great results with it in the past year. So I looked at myself and I said, I've still got some remaining issues that I'd like to deal with. Some brain fog. I typically very often have stomach pain after eating, which sometimes can last most of a day, and that's pretty tiresome. And I've got in fact, as any good project manager should, I've got a list of success criteria that I have compiled that's like 15 bullet points saying these are all the things that I might hope to have improved. And so I have this list, and now I can measure success. That's always a good project manager thing to do. So that kind of brings us up to today. My hope is I'm scheduled myself for a start of carnivore in earnest on June 1st. And I figure I'll go 60 days really strict with myself. And then after that, in a controlled kind of a way, I can start reintroducing individual things like cheese, like um, uh, leafy greens, maybe because they've never seemed to give me a trouble that I could specifically nail down. But in the meantime, I think I'm going to enjoy this. It's going to be fun because I love meat. I mean, I always have. Never had a problem with that. I've never been on a vegetarian diet except for one time for about 2 months. I did that at the doctor's recommendation because I had developed a fissure And he thought that part of the reason I was having trouble, a fissure, anal fissure, and part of the reason I was having trouble was because I wasn't because of a parasite that I picked up when I was in India, which is certainly possible. And in fact, I was sick while I was there with something that most likely was a parasite. So so, so I went on that and, went off of it again after the 2 months, and I was doing better, so there was every reason not to continue it. But other than that brief period, I really haven't done, um, any serious, vegetarian diet ever. So I'll have fun with it. I figure, I love steak, I like fish, I, I'm fine with, like, pork. There's places around here that make fresh pork sausage, and in fact, I can even go there and they will get for me, some of the more unusual cuts like pork belly, which is what they smoke and make bacon out of here. And, but you can get it fresh also and cook that, and there's lots of good healthy fat in that. So I'm kinda looking forward to it in a way, but I also have some concerns, just because, for example, I've been taking supplements for many years, and I'm thinking, "Well, okay, do I just continue to take them for now and see what happens? Do I back off maybe on some of them? If I'm only gonna be eating, like, twice a day, well, my vitamin regimen is set up so that I have 3, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and then I also have something I take in the morning when I first wake up and something I take at night before bed." So and it'd be nice to be able to get rid of a lot of that, and also I'm on, metformin, on a low dose of metformin, not the maximum that they usually get to, 2 grams a day. I'm only at 1 gram, and I'm also on a medication for the foot pain, which remains, the Lyrica. Pregabalin is the generic for that. I'm on that also on, like, half of the maximum of the dose that they can give, and I still have some pain, but what I noticed is if I took the full amount, my brain started to get a little foggy, and I mentioned this to my doctor, to my endocrinologist, and she said, "Well, yeah, it's a trade-off, that's gonna happen." I'm like, I don't like that." So so I backed it off, and I live with a certain amount of pain, and I've tried backing it off further to, like, only 75 a day. 300 is the max. I'm taking 150. I tried to back it off to 75, but the pain started to come back pretty bad, so I went back to the 150. But if I can really get my sugar stable on this, on eating carnivore, my hope is to be able to get rid of both of those medications as they will just simply no longer be needed. So that's kinda where I'm at now.
So exciting times.
Yeah,
And I mean, you're obviously optimistic about it given your experience with Atkins, because I mean,
yeah,
that's as close as you're gonna get to a carnivore style of eating anyway, right?
yeah, that's right. That's right. And in fact, I'm looking at it as an elimination diet, like, to find out what's bothering me, what's creating some of these, residual problems. And in his case, Dr. Eric Westman, I really appreciate Dr. Westman. He's very even-handed and reasonable in the things he says. He doesn't resort to hyperbole, right? He just speaks the facts as he sees them. He calls the carnivore diet the ultimate elimination diet, and I suppose he's right. I mean, what else you got to do except go on a complete water fast, right? So, so yeah, I do have high hope for a lot of these.
So do you think it's something that you might begin on June 1st and then feel like, well, I'm happy like this now?
Yeah, I hope so. I really do. I mean, there are things that I will miss. I love to cook. And in fact, when I went low carb in 2012, I I kind of what I did is I made it a challenge for myself, the cooking side of it, which is to say, like an artist sometimes as an exercise will paint with a limited number of colors on the palette. And just like allow themselves 3 or 4 colors, for example, just as an exercise. So I regarded cooking for low carb, for Atkins, as an exercise and a challenge in looking at what ingredients I can have and what I can do with them. So I'll open up the fridge and say, "Oh, I've got this, this, and that." I'll I will see what I can do with that. I'll put something together, and I've come up with quite a few dishes. When I used to cook for my mom when she was with me, She used to tell people, "We eat low carb," and they'd say, "Oh, I could never do that. I'd miss this, I'd miss that." And she would tell them, "We do not suffer. We eat really well," which is true. I mean, heavy cream and butter and meats, and you can get low carb versions of so many things like coconut milk, for example. You can get no sugar added coconut milk. It's got like 1 gram of carb per serving, per the amount that I would put into a recipe. And there's lots of vegetables that are relatively low carb. There's peppers and garlic is good for you, and it's so potent that you only need a small amount, and things like that. So anyway, this is what I've done then, and I'm looking at carnivore and saying, "Wow, this is really limiting." Give me like 2 colors of paint on my palette. But on the other hand, it'll be a challenge. I kind of like a challenge, and we'll see where it goes. There are lots of recipes and YouTube channels that have carnivore recipes as their focus, and some of them sound interesting. It's amazing what you could do with eggs and egg whites and things like that. So I'll be trying some of those, but I will miss that. But what was one of your guests recently said, nothing tastes as good as having good health feels.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's paraphrasing, but
Yeah.
that's the
Yeah.
gist of it.
Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and, you know, uh, I wonder when you start eating this way and you get lots of time back
Mhm.
and you are able to spend the time in different ways and maybe you feel you're gonna be feeling better most likely.
Yeah.
Um, I wonder if you're gonna look at it the same way. I wonder if you're gonna go, "Well, I'm happy to give up the kitchen for this."
Yeah, exactly. It could very well be. My biggest challenge is probably gonna be coffee. I love coffee. For me, it's a self-care thing to get up at 4 AM and make myself my day's first cup of coffee, and I really enjoy that, and I'm not fond of it black. I like to put a little heavy cream in it. So, if I can tolerate the dairy, and heavy cream is probably the most innocuous of all the dairies, as far as, things in it that might be a problem, like lactose. There's very little lactose in heavy cream, and the fat, of course, is fine with me. I have no problem with fat. So yeah, there will be some challenges, but I fully expect that yeah, if it's as successful for me as so many of the testimonials people have given for themselves, then I probably will want to stay on it. So I'm not locked into moving away from it, but I very well might.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you started this run of low carb in 2012, but the original one when you actually consulted with Dr. Atkins,
Mhm.
when was that?
1987. So 37
87.
years ago. Yeah,
Wow.
37 years ago. Yeah.
That was my first year of junior high school.
Oh boy.
So
Yeah.
so, um, when I did Atkins the first time, that was 2000, and there was a lot of pushback about Atkins then.
Right.
So, in media and, dietitians and whatever, but in 1987, what must it have been like if you were on a low carb diet?
Well, it hadn't really become that popular by then, so there was no pushback from conventional medicine to say, "Oh, wait a minute, this is dangerous." Maybe dangerous for them more than for the patients. But the conventional wisdom back then was, as it is today in many respects, still saturated fat is the root of all dietary evil. And so, they would say, "Oh, you're going to sit around and eat bacon all day?" And well, I guess that's an option, but it's certainly not all you have. And so, yeah, I had heard of Dr. Atkins before that. I know he was receiving a lot of flack from his own industry, right? Conventional medicine did not like Dr. Atkins at all, which is really sad because he had it on the ball, and really he was going back to pre 1923, right before the days of insulin. This is what doctors did for their diabetic patients to keep them alive and they had a lot of success. I've recently been reading Gary Taub's book, Rethinking Diabetes. It's phenomenal. One of the things that I love about it is it has confirmed to me a lot of things that I suspected for many years about what the history of it of carbohydrate restriction must have been and of diabetes treatment. Just by inference, thinking, how did they get here? And I always knew, for example, one of the things is that they must have given in to patients, because saying basically, well, if we tell them what to do to control their blood glucose, if we tell them what's right, they're not going to do it anyway. So rather than just tell them what's right, we won't even tell them. We'll just assume that they're not going to do what's right, and we'll tell them, go ahead and eat what you want and take your insulin. And this is essentially what happened after 1923 when insulin became, I think it was 23, 21 or 23. I believe it was 23. Anyway, this is essentially what happened is at some point they realized or decided that they would decide for the patients what they would tell them about the truth. And part of that involved saying, just eat what you want and take your insulin. And really sad because you look at the outcome of that, and health is in serious decline when you approach it that way, especially in those days when there were no glucose meters, right? The glucose meter wasn't invented until the 1980s, I believe, by Dr. Richard Bernstein, who is another person that I have followed over the years. He's done tests on a lot of different things, but particularly glucose meters. So the glucose meter I use is the Abbott Freestyle Lite, and he did comparative tests of a lot of different meters, and that was the one that he felt was the most accurate consistently. So that's the one I bought because I wanted to achieve tight control. One of the frustrating things for me was that when I first started doing this and I had the foot pain and I thought, "I'm gonna need some kind of medication." After, like, a year of trying with diet only to 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 keep my blood glucose as even as possible to try to heal up the pain in my feet. So the first endocrinologist I went to, I said to him, "I'm not interested in taking medication. I don't want any kind of pills. What I want is for you to work with me to achieve the tightest possible glucose control that I can get." He heard none of that. At the end of and I walked in and I said, "Number 1, I don't want medication, and number 2, I will not have a nerve conduction study," because I knew they're awful. They're really, I don't know if you've ever had one of these, but they're nasty. They put electrical pulses through your nerves, and they watch for the transit time to see, do you really have nerve damage? And it's a really unpleasant test. And so I walked in and I said, "I will not have a nerve conduction study, and I'm not looking for medication." After my session with him, he closes the whole thing by saying, "And if you want medication, you're gonna have to go for a nerve conduction study, and here's a script to go and get that work done. You can have it done around the corner." Like, did you not listen? Did you not hear anything I said? Apparently, the answer is no. So I quickly found a new endocrinologist, and I love the one I'm working with now. She's terrific. She works with me. She's still conventional, and she's not into the nutritional side of things. Every time I go there, she tries to push statins on me because my cholesterol is a little bit high. It runs around 280, which is not terrible, and I've learned not to worry about it. So we go through our little dance every time I go there. It's like, "Okay, you understand, I think you should be on statins, and yes, and you play your part by saying that, and I play my part by saying, 'No, thank you.'" And we move on.
Initially, you're gonna be trying for just 30 days or 90 days, did you say?
60, I think. I'm
60.
committed to doing it for the months of June and July. I may start sooner because my part of my reason for putting this off is because I wanna use up stuff that I have I hate to waste food. So I'm gonna just use up the things that I have, and I figure by June 1st, I will have done that. In reality, I may run out sooner because I'm starting to run out already, and I'm not buying any new stuff of that type. So I may run out sooner, and if I do, I'll start it sooner. But 60 days is what I'm looking at now because I think that's a fair test to see to establish a baseline for when I then start to reintroduce a few things like nuts. I love nuts, and a lot of the things that I can eat as just blood sugar control use like almond flour or coconut flour. Well, I'd like to in a very systematic and controlled way, reintroduce those things so that I can see what effect they actually have. Do they affect me adversely or not? And if not, I can keep them in. And if they do, well, then I'll take them back out again and try the next thing. So I'm kind of into the science of it. I enjoy that. I'm a self-taught engineer and worked doing that kind of thing for, well, virtually all of my career. Really, I split my career between two things: engineering and technical writing. Because techies hate to write. So if they find out that you can write, you just by default you get all of the writing work. That's oh yeah, give it to him. He'll do it. He can take all the notes at meetings, which I hate. But this is what you get if people know that you can write and you can communicate reasonably well. Well, great, you get all the work. So at some point, I stopped applying for engineering jobs, and I just said I might as well be a writer. So naturally, I went in as a writer, and then they would say, "Oh, you've got all that technical background. Oh, you can do this and this and this for us, this engineering work." Okay, fine, whatever. If you're happy, I'm happy. Just pay me. And I retired last year, and I'm feeling fine, and I'm glad to be retired. And I have time for all kinds of things now. As I mentioned, I record audiobooks. Right now, I'm working on a version of the Bible that has never been recorded as an audiobook. It's from the late 19th century, and it's, I think, the best translation out there. And so I've been working on it. I finished the New Testament. I'm about halfway or a little more through the Old Testament, and it's been a blast. It's been a lot of fun. I'm an actor at heart, so so I'm
How
having fun with all this.
how long does it take to so you've read the whole of the Old Testament,
The New Testament, yeah, all
New
of the
Testament.
new, which are the Christian scriptures, and then I'm about halfway through the Hebrew scriptures. Yeah.
So for the New Testament, how long does that take to read cover to cover?
Well,
When you
to
I
record
guess
it,
it's probably longer when you're recording because you have to have multiple takes sometimes, right?
yeah,
But
and
just
it's about 5
uh
to 1. So if it
uh,
takes an hour to listen to it, it takes about 5 hours to actually record and produce it. Yeah. It's pretty heavy, and you can do it. Some people, if they're really good, they can do it in, like, 3 to 1, but you figure you gotta, yeah, first you have to record it. That's gonna take as much time as it takes, and with retakes and pickups, you're probably looking at 20% more, of that. Then you have to go through the whole thing end to end and do all your editing and your cleanup, your processing, and then after that, you have to listen through the whole thing again to make sure you got everything and you haven't missed anything. So right away, that's at least 3x. And now, if you whatever time it takes to do the editing and all this other, it runs it up to between 4 and 5x. I figure about 5x. So for that 100 hours worth of listening time, it takes 500 hours worth of actual production time to produce it.
that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow,
it's
that's a crazy amount of time.
yeah, it's not for everybody. There's a lot of people that, like, try it out. They think, "Oh, yeah, I'd like to record audiobooks," and then they try it for a little while and say, "Nah, I don't think so. This is like you're sitting in a little padded cell for hours and hours and hours." And it's not for everybody, but for me, it's a labor of love. I just enjoy it.
Yeah. I think I'd enjoy the recording part. I think the editing part might be a bit less fun for me.
Yeah, yeah. Actually, I kinda like it too, thankfully, and I found a good program that really lets me do a good job at the editing to visualize what the audio is gonna look like, so that when I do cuts and edits and drop-ins, you can't tell. You really can't tell. It sounds exactly the same, and you never know that there's been a cut there. Part of that is knowing how to record a pickup so that it will meld well with what came before it. So whatever inflection and pitch and volume you, made your mistake on, when you do the pickup, you make sure to replicate that same volume or inflection and so forth. So, I like it. I take it as a technical challenge, and for me, that's what it's about.
You have a voice that I feel like would be very good for commercial television. Have you ever done any, voiceovers
Yes,
for commercials
yes,
or anything?
yes, radio primarily, but I've done a little bit of television as well. Yeah, in fact, in the 1980s, at about the same time I was going to, or actually just before I went to Dr. Atkins, because I went back to doing regular, real consulting work. For about 5 years in the 1980s, I was, an on-air radio personality at a number of different New York market stations, a couple of FMs that were running like 37 and 38,000 watts each, and, there was an AM in, Hackensack, New Jersey that blanketed into Manhattan, and I loved it, but there just came a point where I realized, yeah, you can't really make a living at it. It's just there's too many people out there that are really talented, and that tends to depress the wages. So there are a few who make it really big and do really well, but they're like 1%. The rest are barely subsistence. So I went back into consulting work because that paid the bills. So, but in the meantime, I have continued in the background doing voiceover for doing commercials. Like a friend of mine owns a couple of radio stations in Atlantic City. I do stuff for him. I've done, a lot of, commercial and industrial voiceover. I do, like, e-learning voiceover tracks, and those are good too. The advantage that I have with those is I understand the tech. So for me, it's not just, about reading the words off the script, it's about actually teaching. Yeah, I love to teach. So, it's about, taking understanding that material well enough that when I speak it, it sounds extemporaneous. That's the real, brass ring, if you will, for voiceover, especially e-learning, is sounding like you are the expert. And I can do that because I actually understand generally what's being, said.
Yeah, you're gearing up. It's less than a month now until
Yeah,
your N of 1 experiment.
that's it.
Um, yeah. So, in an ideal world, where would you want to be 60 days from now or 60 days from the start?
So one of the things I'd like to have less of is all the time. That's and like I say, I've got this list of things that I hope, like no more stomach pain after eating. I get a lot of stomach pain. Blood glucose levels nice and stable. I bought myself a big stock of test strips so that I can keep an eye on how things go as I'm progressing. I tend to wake up a lot in the night. Just, like 4 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours after I go to sleep, I wake up for an hour and a half, 2 hours, can't sleep. Thankfully, now that I'm retired, I can just go back to sleep and sleep as long as I have to. I don't have an alarm clock gonna wake me up to go to work, and that's helped. But, I really would like to get something more consistent, so improved sleep patterns. My sense of taste and smell are not wonderful. After my second round of COVID, they came back maybe 50%. And so, I'm hoping to get some of that back possibly. I have itchy patches on my skin, on my arms and my legs, on my scalp to the point where it bleeds sometimes. Just on and on. This, like I said, bullet list of 15 things that I've got, that I'm hoping, we'll see some improvement. Now, and if that happens, oh, and more energy potentially. Not like I lack energy now exactly, but I have so much to do. People said to me, "Don't retire. Don't retire. You should keep working. You'll sit around and do nothing." Like, no, that's never been my problem. Never. So yeah, so I've got like this recording work is just one example. Another is I want to move, from I'm in a very expensive, high cost of living area now, and that makes sense when you're working because you get a higher salary as a result, and it covers all of that. But as a retiree on a fixed income, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'm hoping to move to a much lower cost of living area. That's going to take a lot of energy because I've accumulated so much stuff over the years, my various interests. Like I mentioned, in my communication to you, that I make plant medicines. That's another thing I want to be able to do more of. That takes some time. I've got a whole rig for that, and that I wanna be able to take with me when I move to the new location. But there's an awful lot of other stuff that I need to just say goodbye to. Like, these are hobbies that I've had, and they've been interesting. Like, I have a pinball machine. That's one of the first things I did was I had a job as a pinball mechanic when I first came out of college. And that as a result, I have a pinball machine. It's been fun, but I need to get rid of it, to sell it or do something. So, all of this extra energy I hope to get, that's where it's gonna go, a lot of it. But in the meantime, I've never been one to, like, sit around and watch TV. I don't even have a television, in fact, I got rid of it 4 years ago and never looked back. Just, I had it mostly for my mom, and I realized at some point that even she hadn't turned it on in several months. So I called up the cable company and canceled it. They were horrified at the idea that Somebody could live without television? And what are you gonna do for entertainment? I told them, "We have cats. We have we have wonderful cats, and they're great entertainment for us." And my mom spent a lot of time playing bridge online. She was a really good bridge player until she was, like, 90 when the Lord took her home. She was a really good bridge player and very with it, very, what do I wanna say, lucid, very even in her late 80s. She declined some in the during the pandemic and the lockdowns. When she couldn't get face-to-face time with people, it really took a toll on her. It really did. So, felt badly for that. But anyway, these are all things that are interests of mine and which I hope to put more time into to do more recording. Because once I finish this version of the Bible, there's lots more I wanna do, and put online. So a friend of mine posts all of these on his website. There's a whole page of everything I've recorded so far, and, so I hope to keep doing a lot of that as well.
Nice. Well, I hope you'll come back once you get started and let us know how you're going.
I I
It would
I
be
really would love to do that because I hope to
mm,
keep a journal, and I'm even thinking I may start posting, videos on my channel, my YouTube channel, which will be my journey, maybe, once or twice a week, just say, "Here's what's happened. Here's where I am. This is what I observe," and, maybe helpful and encouraging to people.
on that
See,
on that point, how can we find you?
right, so that ataclexion, that's a made up word. It just means somebody who's interested in a lot of things. That's I made it up so I can say what it means. But just, so ataclexion is actually how you would go to my YouTube channel. In the meantime, until I get that up and running, if someone would like to contact me, they're welcome to do so at my voiceover website, and that is davidwandel.com, and, maybe you can post that in the show notes. I'd be happy to take calls. There's a on the website, there is a form that you can just fill out, tell me your name and your email address so I can write back to you, and then a brief question, and I'll do my best to, and I'll get an email sent to my email account when you do that, and then I'll do my best to answer whatever questions I get.
Sure, I'll post those below.
Wonderful.
David, I really appreciate you coming on. Thank you so much,
Oh, it's my
for
pleasure.
sharing your plans.
I've been binge watching your your interviews because they're so good.
Sure.
So for me, this is just a little bit of give back.